Thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to the session on exploring IP models for knowledge exchange in the creative economy. My name's John Kingsbury. I'm Programme Director of the Creative Economy at Nesta, National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. We also run the Digital Arts R&D Fund that David Willetts referenced in partnership with Arts Council England, Arts Council for Wales and the AHRC, where we bring together research teams with creative organisations and with technology companies to undertake R&D which benefits the arts. I'm also a governor at Ravensbourne College, which I'm pleased to say does a lot of activity that brings industry together with teaching and some research as well. Today's session, exploring IP models for knowledge exchange in the creative economy, I hope will be really practical. We don't just have Professor Charlotte Waelde here. Am I saying it right? Waelde?
Perfect.
Fine. From Exeter University. We also have two of the people who are involved in running two of the creative exchange programs, Morag and Georgina. Okay, and you can introduce yourselves in a minute. The format is very simple, really, which is I've asked each of the three panelists to speak for about 5 minutes. I'll ask them some questions and then also throw questions out to the floor, and I hope that we can have a really lively discussion. IP is a very emotive subject area, and I just sort of wanted to introduce the subject area. I did a bit of research, and the Intellectual Property Office already has a guide for universities to manage and exploit their IP. This is published on the IPO's website. And in a way, the lessons from the Creative Exchange Hubs, I think I want to sort of compare and contrast a lot of the theory with some of the practical lessons from actually the hubs doing this over the last 18 months or so. So that's what I'm hoping to tease out. I think anecdotally, the feedback is that universities don't do this particularly well. They don't particularly, they want to keep their IP and protect it, and they overvalue it, which means that IP transfer licensing can be limited. That's an anecdotal story, but the data on this, the last data I saw about this was from 2009, 2010, was that IP exploitation from the UK's universities accounted for £84 million, which is considerable, but it feels like it's kind of small given the amount of funding, research and development that happens in our institutions. So I just wanted to sort of throw that out there as a controversial figure. I think, Morag, you're going to, without much ado, I'm going to ask you to give some slides. The person who's not here today, who's in the programme, is Martin Brassel, who's been working with each of the four knowledge exchange hubs. He's in Malaysia, and for reasons which I'm sure you're aware of, he can't get back from Kuala Lumpur at the moment. So it's unfortunately we don't have him speaking here today, but hopefully he's sent through a couple of slides which Morag is going to try to interpret so that some of the content from his presentation will be shared with you. Morag, thank you.
Right, so we were asked as hub directors just to give something of a flavour of the ways in which IP issues have been relevant to and have been kind of tackled within the knowledge exchange hubs. As you're probably most aware, there are 4 knowledge exchange hubs. Georgina and I head up 2 of them, and there are another couple that we'll also give you some background on. So what is Creative Works London? It is one of these hubs. It's been established in order to provide a framework and a set of funding opportunities that allow collaborative research to happen between the arts and humanities research base across a wide range of universities in London and SMEs within the creative and cultural economy. We have 39 London-based research organisations, museums, libraries, archives, and we're also a partner in the ERDF-funded project, London Creative and Digital Fusion, which some of you may be aware of. And I mention that because the patterns of collaboration in that project are slightly different, and therefore the IP issues it throws up are slightly different. What we actually do is, first of all, undertake original research on aspects of the creative economy. That's organised across a range of areas of focus. So one is focused on the digital economy, and Mark Plumlee, who could wave his hand, leads that strand. We also have one that is led by Andy Pratt, which is on place, work and knowledge, and is looking at various examples of innovation hubs within the creative economy. And we have a third strand looking at London's audiences, which is led jointly by Barry Ife and John Sloboda from the Guildhall School. So those are the areas of research focus. We also provide policy advice, which is drawing on what we learn in that research. And then finally, and this is where the IP issues become most interesting, we have a variety of funded schemes. We have creative vouchers, which allow projects to be carried out in collaboration involving SMEs and arts and humanities researchers. We have a scheme called Researchers in Residence, which allows PhD students and early career researchers to spend time in a creative enterprise. And we also have a scheme called Entrepreneurs in Residence, which brings creative entrepreneurs into one of our research partners. So there are two things that I really wanted to emphasise in relation to the discussions we would be having today about IP. First, that IP is actually one of the objects of our research. So it's not just something that within our everyday practice, it is something which we are focusing on. So for example, colleagues within the digital economy strand will be running a series of workshops over the coming year called From Knowledge to Practice, Community Sharing in the Creative Industries, which will be looking particularly at some of the conceptual and practical issues associated with the ways in which IP is framed in different sectors of the creative economy. So that's a kind of developing project of research in which we will be engaging people from within the creative economy. But as a funder of collaborative research, we are also, of course, involved in thinking about the IP issues that pertain to the many various and really kind of distinctive kinds of collaboration that we're funding. And I think the approach that we had initially was to point people to the document that John has mentioned and kind of tell them to get on with it, really. You know, that each project should work out its own arrangements around IP, and that's a requirement before they apply to us for funding, that they're able to describe what those are. I think, given the complexity and the scale of what we're doing, that was a sensible approach, but actually it does have some limitations. And I think those are captured in the last thing I want to say, which is the kind of tension that we're discovering within universities between a variety of activities that are broadly speaking described using words like commercialization and enterprise, and another set of activities happening within universities that are broadly speaking described using ideas of impact or knowledge exchange. And it is very common in universities that those are managed by completely separate teams, and they are supported by very different strategies, policies, and processes. And in one or two cases, our academics have found themselves uncomfortably caught in the middle. So they have begun with a vision of the kinds of terms that are under that engagement impact. So facilitating, co-creating, collaborating, knowledge exchange is a two-way affair, benefit, mutuality. All of that has been the kind of rhetorical framing of the way they have set out to do their research. And then they have found within the research offices that have to sign off the contracts that underpin the funding a whole different language, which I've captured here. These are all real phrases from various people's strategies, but to save blushes, I haven't attributed them. And that's where we've got optimizing commercial potential, protecting, rights management, exploiting IP, capturing IP. So a radically different rhetoric and set of expectations is operating within those two different parts of what universities have done. And I think we are actually asking a lot of our researchers to navigate that in their own local context. So that's the thing I wanted to flag up, was really a reflection on how the universities need to be able to integrate their thinking about the ways in which they protect and capture commercial value and the ways in which they facilitate co-creation. Because at the moment, it's a little bit haphazard, and I think, to be honest, it's extremely difficult for research colleagues to navigate. So that was the thing I wanted to say. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Morag.
Design in action. We have worked very hard on our IP model. It's been one of the things that has troubled us most right from day one and right from the start of our process. And the reason for that is because we've been working with SMEs and micro businesses, and we have about 500 of them at the moment. The process by which we deliver an innovation model is one of co-creation. Therefore, the co-creation model actually complicates the IP model. So how do you work with a group of people who are giving their all to try and develop new thinking around specific topics, and yet help them manage their intellectual property within that process? So we worked with Martin Brassel very closely on this, and what we determined we would do was that the IP would be retained by Design in Action. Now, that has, and I have to say this, put some people off working with us. Some companies have backed away from us. But in actual fact, it's worked very well for most of the SMEs and the micro businesses. Because the big thing that they have a problem with is if their IP is breached, how do they protect it? And do they have the resources to manage that portfolio? And how do they operate that? And they have found the protection of a university, which has, if you like, can shout louder, can be slightly more aggressive, can be difficult with anybody who breaches IP, a good method of protection for them. So they are using us as a kind of shield. So we've also had experiences where some companies did not wish us to hold on to 100% of the IP. When we licensed back at the end of the process, we were licensed back 90% of the IP. The reason we only license back 90% of the IP is that we are trying to ensure the longevity of the work that we do, and so we retain 10% in order to build our own business model. Where we don't retain 10% of that IP, we actually look at an equity agreement with that company. And so we will have up to between 5 and 10% of equity. And for some individuals, neither of those is a great way of working for them, but it works for most people. We have launched one company, and that company required or wanted 100% of its IP. We did that. We took a 5% equity stake in the company. That company has subsequently got a value of it now of £3 million, which is very nice. So the equity that we put in, which was £20,000 to kickstart the company, is now worth about £50,000. So we're getting a return on our investment, if you like. Now, where the IP that has been developed as part of our innovation methodology is not picked up by any of the participants of that, and we offer it to the participants in the first instance, if nobody wants it, what we do is we put it up on our website, and all those who are members of or who have partners of Design in Action and signed in and registered with us can then exploit that absolutely freely, absolutely openly. All we require for them to do is to tell us that they are doing this, and we will work with them, because what we want to understand as part of the process of Design in Action is how you build new businesses and new companies, how you develop IP, but most importantly, how design functions in this process. So all of the companies that we are forming and all of the ideas that we are generating has a designer right at the heart of the production methodology or the ideation methodology, or the whole of Sebastian's flowchart, if you like. And in order to understand design and designers and their role in this, we have to then put in research at the back end of the commercialization process to watch how it evolves. Now, the companies that have formed, some of them have found it quite difficult to work together. But the one thing they haven't had, and this is the good experience that they've had, is none of them have had a disagreement or an argument about the IP. They've managed to resolve that quite amicably with us as part of the process. The university has had to completely change its infrastructure to support the companies. It has, as John says, the old models no longer work. They're used to patents. They're used to working with large pharma companies where they just simply farm it out. They're suddenly inundated by hundreds of small companies It's increased their workload exponentially. They're finding it quite difficult to manage our portfolio. They're having to put additional resources into that aspect of the infrastructure. But I think this is a valuable thing for the university in going forward, because SMEs sometimes stay SMEs and sometimes they become large businesses. So we're just finding out as we go along.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. And just while Morag goes up, can I ask you a question, Georgina, which is that you're taking a 5%, in that case, you're taking a 5% stake in that. Are you investing in the team as much as the IP, or is what you're investing in actually the IP, or are you making a deal? I guess is the question. Or
I think we are investing in the IP, because the companies are articulating, or the groups of individuals who are forming these new organisations are actually developing new ways of working and new products and services. So if we see, when they put forward their commercialisation strategy, if we see gaps in that, we fill the gaps with other researchers, other aspects, and we peer review each application, and we don't fund where we think this is not going to have a commercial viability or be commercially successful. We're only funding that which we think we can back and win with.
And just for the audience in the room, to make it real, what's the example of the company? Are you able to?
Yes, it's called Beer 52. You can Google it, you can look it up. It's very similar to a wine club. What they're doing is they're looking at craft beers. They're buying in craft beers. They use an extraordinary risky marketing tactic. They use Groupon in the first instance to get themselves into the marketplace. Then they went to a Mail magazine for Christmas and got a voucher on the front. They've now got a standard clientele on a monthly basis, so they've got an annual turnover of £350,000. They've helped many of the craft brewers in Scotland survive and increase their production, so you can see improvements all the way down the food chain, and that's what we're trying to fully understand now, is what this company has done and how it's operating. But it wants to expand. He says he's going to be a £50 million company in 10 years. Well, I hope so.
Fingers crossed. Thank you. Morag.
Yes, so could we encourage people to come and have a seat? Because I think you look a bit as if it might be more comfortable if you did. So there are about a dozen seats at the front if you want to come and help yourselves. Just be bold and come right up to the front. No, nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to move from the back. All right, well, I'm going to say I'm not Martin Brassel. Martin runs Ingot, and he has been working as a facilitator and advisor with each of the hubs, which the AHRC asked him to do in order to try and help us to learn from each other in terms of our approaches. So we thought, when we looked at the slides he sent through from a lonely airport somewhere, that actually this is a useful map for you to have. It describes the ways of working of each of the 4 hubs. So the one on the bottom left is Creative Works London. So people come with an idea, emphasis on one-to-one brokerage, and we have creative vouchers, and we have many partners. One on the bottom right, I think, Georgina, is you.
I recognise that.
So that's a 2-day sandpit session with 20 people, more substantial funding with fewer projects. I think that the top left is probably Creative Exchange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lancaster?
Yeah.
No, that's Creative Exchange there. Okay, so that must be the React.
React.
So that's a themed half-day workshop. It's quite like Creative Works, but there are some differences. Feedback and established sandbox approach, and then the top right, collisions in lab sessions. I like that idea. And forming groups around projects. So again, a variety of different kinds of complexity in terms of the ways in which the contribution of the hubs takes place and the kind of partnerships and projects that emerge from it. There is then, I think, a quite helpful summary that I can't possibly do justice to without Martin, but he has teased out some things about the value add is potentially very significant. So he sees that within each of these hubs and their different models, there is the very significant potential to create value. And then raises a couple of issues about this kind of knowledge-based activity, that there isn't a sort of simple process of finding a buyer, which I think, again, we might want to talk about. And the bottom, which we also thought resonated, which was the importance of everybody within a project having a shared idea about IP. And that's really resonates with what I wanted to say about universities, where I don't think there is a shared idea about IP. And that really does make this kind of work much more difficult. So that, I hope, is helpful, just in providing a little snapshot from what Martin, something like what Martin might have said if he'd been here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Morag. And Charlotte, you're Professor of Intellectual Property Law at University of Exeter.
That's right.
It'd be great for you to tell people about your work and what you found out so far.
Okay, well, what I'm going to talk about is a piece of research that the AHRC has commissioned me and a couple of other people to do. And I'm going to say why this research is important just now. I'm going to explain what we're going to do, particularly around the empirical research, and I'm going to let you know what sort of outcomes we anticipate. Now, the title of the research is Copyright and Publicly Funded Arts and Humanities Research, Identifying Exploitation Models in the Digital Economy, which is a bit of a mouthful. I would have liked a very small acronym, but I couldn't quite get one in out of that. But I think the important bit is that the research question. And the research question is, what copyright framework would best support the translation of publicly funded arts and humanities research content into the digital or creative economy? So in other words, we're looking at research processes, arts and humanities research processes from the point of funding to the point at which the output enters the digital economy. And this is a one-year pilot project. It started at the beginning of this year and it will end in December. And it's built around a combination of empirical research and desk-based research. And the empirical element will start in April. Now, why now for this research? And I think there are a number of factors that have actually already been foreshadowed in what has been said up to now. There are factors around the copyright framework that make it particularly timely. There are challenges of the digital and copyright that make it very timely. And there are real challenges around legal and policy frameworks that also mean that it is that this is a good time to do this. So if we unpick those a bit, copyright, of course, was designed with the individual analogue work in mind. And digitisation reduces those barriers. And researchers, as has been sort of alluded to, they are at the interface of creating, managing and exploiting copyright works. And at the same time, what they want to do is to achieve the aims of their research, to conduct innovative research, make that research accessible and exchangeable and engaging. So there's a real tension there around what researchers want to do and the copyright framework. And if we also think about digital in this context, because digital changes the process of research, it changes the way researchers work, and it also changes the outcomes of research. So processes, as we've heard, are increasingly collaborative. The knowledge exchange hubs are at the interface between academics and business, but research is increasingly collaborative in other ways as well. We cross disciplines, we cross institutions, we cross boundaries, we cross territories as well in the work that we do. Outcomes are, we use all sorts of different platforms now for the research that we work with. So we've moved out of using platforms that are solely within a single institution, and we use commercial platforms. We might use Facebook, we might use Twitter, we might use any one of these platforms. And again, we use them across institutions, we use them across territories. And we distribute the outcomes of our research in increasingly innovative ways, from data visualizations to totem poles. We do this, these are the types of outcomes of research that we do, these digital research that we do. And in this, researchers embrace the fluidity of digital working, remaking, reusing, rehashing. And these, of course, pose significant challenges for copyright. The legal environment around copyright is in a state of flux. On the one hand, there are calls for broader scope of copyright for rights holders, so that these new and innovative types of works can actually be exploited in the marketplace. On the other hand, there are calls for relaxations in the copyright framework, so people can actually use and reuse lawfully within the framework. Licensing has been suggested as an answer to some of the challenges that are faced, and so there's been a programme in Europe, Licenses for Europe, looking at things like, can we find a licensing framework for user-generated content? And licensing, we're seeing moves around licensing in the UK as well with the Digital Copyright Exchange. So can licensing come in here to help? And of course, when you look at copyright policy, there are always consultations going on in Europe, in the UK. What should the shape of our copyright framework actually look like? And there's one in Europe that's just finished, I think, or maybe just coming to an end. And we have the policy environment, and which actually plays out on a micro scale in universities. We have, on the one hand, the real push for openness, open access for scholarly communications being, sort of one that is really quite high on the table. But we've moved from scholarly communications, and I believe we're moving into monographs. What is not being said, what is not on that agenda yet, is what about open access for digital artefacts, which are created more and more by researchers in arts and humanities? They're not on the agenda yet, but why not? We also have funders who really would like the fruits of the publicly funded research to be freely available. But, of course, on the other hand, we have the tension. We have, as researchers, we are required to show sustainability for our research. We are also required to show how our research actually has impact. This is pushed, of course, both from government and from the funders. And in addition, the funders, and the AHRC is no exception, they need to justify the money that they get from government. What do their researchers do with it? So this demands us to show some sort of value for for the funding that we receive for our research projects. So that's the background. So what are we going to do against that background? Now, our focus is on the academic, and as I say, it's on the research process from the point of funding by the AHRC, because we're looking at AHRC-funded projects, to the point at which the output actually gets into the digital or creative economy. And we'll be asking, as we're looking at this and doing empirical research, going out to talk to researchers, what we will be doing is to unpick the copyright challenges that researchers actually face and asking them what the challenges actually are and how they resolve the challenges that they face. We'll be identifying the copyright-protected works that researchers develop during the course of their research. And then we will be looking at the value, the copyright value embodied in those works. So when I say copyright value, economic, social, or cultural value that's actually embodied within the works. We'll be focusing on AHRC-funded research projects from two different streams. One is from the Knowledge Exchange Hubs, and one will be looking at the digital transformations theme. And these two are slightly different because, as we've heard, Knowledge Exchange Hub is very close to market, so that brings in its own challenges around intellectual property, own issues. Careful with the word. And on the other hand, we're looking at digital transformations because the research funded under the digital transformation scheme is funded very much in the expectation of experimentation and transformation. So that brings in potentially a different set of IP concerns at that stage. So what do we want as the outcome of what we do? It is a pilot project, I should stress that. We want to ask whether the methodology that we are using would support a more systematic investigation of copyright and publicly funded research. And we also want to consider during the work whether it would be feasible to track the outcomes of projects once the outcome's actually within the digital economy. So in other words, once the product or whatever it is, the outcome of the research is in the digital economy, track it over time and see what happens to it and consider the value over time. And I'll let you all know when we've done our report.
Thank you. Shall I just... one question from me. You talked about the tensions there between... the need to demonstrate return on investment for public funding in academic research, and especially in the sort of rather heated kind of debate about copyright, and when to publish in journals versus when to release research as it goes along. And it just strikes me that creative businesses are absolutely keen to get hold of research, market research, valuable research that academics do as quickly as possible, because they're always running to try and develop new products and new services, versus this kind of requirement to go through publishing in order to sort of meet requirements of funders. And I just wonder whether your research so far has highlighted a way through that tension, whether you're coming down on one side of the fence or the other side.
I think sort of perhaps, and correct me if I'm wrong, behind that there was a little bit of a suggestion that, sort of get your research out as quickly as possible. You might have had the idea of maybe patents in there somewhere where, where you shouldn't actually publish until,
sure.
if you want to get a patent, don't publish until...
I'm talking about copyright, actually. Yeah.
Copyright is less problematic to sort of make the results of what you are doing as you go along. But it brings in really, really interesting interfaces with other government policies at the moment. And one of them is, of course, the open access one, which says you shall publish, you shall make the fruits of your research available in an open access repository. And this then, hopefully, will actually free up the types of the different places in which academics are happy to publish. So no longer will they necessarily be going for a particular journal, but because it will sort of matter less which journal you publish in, but the requirement is open access, then it may be that these things actually get published sooner rather than later.
And but you, in your intro, you kind of echoed the work that Professor Ian Hargreaves has done, which is based on copyright, both on copyright and intellectual property, that says the law around these things falls way behind the practice and also the opportunity, and that's where you're coming from at the moment. Yeah, okay, good. All right, well, thank you. Well, you've heard from the three speakers and a couple of slides from Martin in his absence. I just wanted to do a kind of poll of the room, really, which is how many of you work for higher educational institutions? And just put your hand up. Okay, and how many of you have had experience, practical experience of intellectual property, trying to exploit it or ship it out of your university or your institution? Some of you? I mean, I just, for those people that put up their hand, I'd be tremendously keen to hear your views about IP and your institution or previous institutions that you've worked with. So, I mean, I'm going to ask you for your questions, but also for your comments and your experiences. So please feel free to ask the panel questions, but also it'd be great to hear from you as well. And in particular, relevance to either your research and how that research can be useful for creative organisations outside the institution, but also perhaps in deal terms that you've had to do. So do we have a microphone at the back somewhere? Who's going around? Yeah. So are there questions either for the panellists or comments? Thanks.
So now we've connected Digital Economy Council, which I lead on the Copyright Hub project, which you refer to as the Digital Copyright Exchange. Copyright Hub now. But when I was at Ravensbourne, beginning to lead its transformation to be more radical in the way it worked with industries and especially SMEs, one of the pieces of early research I was involved in was this idea that as an institution, it would make far more money and make itself far more famous if it adopted a really radical approach and just said, any IP we generate from our research, we just give it away. Give it away to the market. And I swear to this day, it would have made the institution far more money and far more famous through the attention that it drew to itself by taking that radical approach than it would have ever made in a million years. Partly it should have learned from its experiences because Last FM famously began its early days in Ravensbourne. They didn't get a penny from it because they fell out of that IP. Imagine that one of the previous. But just with the knowledge exchange approach, really, I'm surprised there's not been more radical approaches to different approaches to IP. I mean, the approaches that seem to be adopted by the different institutions seem quite standard from my experience of what universities have been discussing and exploring for years. So there's two different sides of the story, isn't there? There's the IP of what you do with the IP of your research and your own intellectual property that comes out of the institution, and how you work with businesses innovating new IP through collaboration. On the latter point, I'm really struck by the point of SMEs and micro companies are vastly time-consuming and deliver virtually no returns. Generally, the huge percentage just won't. So I wonder whether there's a different approach there, which is almost like a one-click license approach, where if you're going to work with an SME, they just pay everyone pays a flat fee up to a certain value. If their company turns into $1 million, then you might trigger that value to go up. But I just think radical new approaches, if they can't begin in universities, then, which is where they should begin to spread into the market, can we not be more radical about how we view this?
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Okay, I'll take another question if there is one.
I'm Mark Plumlee from the Centre for Digital Music at Queen Mary University of London. I'm also on the Creative Works London Knowledge Exchange Hub with Morag. So one of the things that I'm interested in is how IP works for our university. We're reviewing our IP policy at the moment to see what things need to change. And one of the things that we've seen as the work that I do is that there is this old model that universities generate some intellectual property that you want to sell to some people and they give you some money, and this licensing income is what the Hive measure the university with and give that money to the university. But actually, in lots of stuff we do, we're working with some bands that have got next to no money. If we can get our stuff out there and get them to use some beat tracking thing that goes off into a conference, this is great, because it gets the students to have new ideas and it gets us to build things that we wouldn't have thought of building before. So I think really to echo what Chris was saying, I think the value is as much in both directions there than it is as something that gets created in universities. So we're really trying to work to help make that work. So I'd be very interested to have a conversation afterwards, because we also have an AHRC big data project in music, and so we've been trying to solve the copyrighted music for research purposes thing, and there we're working with a company that licenses music that we're looking to license for non-commercial research use, so that we can actually get to use collections of stuff that normally we wouldn't be able to do with. I'm not sure if there's a question in there.
No, that's fine. But Mark, have you just answered on behalf of Morag there? Morag, would you like to?
Well, no, I think his examples are very helpful. I mean, of course you're right, Chris. There's a real opportunity, but I think we shouldn't forget that universities are responding to a variety of different kinds of external expectations and pressures. So if we only did one kind of thing, it would be much easier. But actually we do a huge variety of different kinds of innovation based on different relationships. And there are, as Mark was suggesting, various funders through more or less mediated routes who expect different things from us. So, to be able to declare a certain value in terms of our commercialisation of research is one of the things that we need to ensure, at the same time as we recognise that in terms of the research drivers, then the need for the kind of radical thinking that you're talking about is really strong. And I've found that the institutional process of having that conversation is probably less straightforward than it should be, actually, because it's dispersed across the institution.
And Georgina, your response to Chris's challenge, more radical.
Well, I don't think your methodology is very radical, actually. I mean, we looked at the flat fee as a methodology, and that didn't give the SME sector any protection from predatory organisations externally. So they preferred the model. I mean, we worked the model up with them. So maybe the SME sector isn't radical either. So you can look at radical solutions, but you've still got to apply them, and you've also got to go through a process because you're in an institution, and it's also got to be replicable. And I think the thing that we're trying to do is to look at different ways of dealing with IP in different structures. We've got 3 at the moment. We'll certainly add to that as we move forward, but we've got to bring the businesses with us. And if they don't want it, or there's no call for it, then it has no function. So,
Georgina,
I hear what you're saying, and I know, but
Chris's first point about giving the IP away is radical, because I don't know. Is it not?
There's a whole lot of open access out there. Glasgow University has a portal where all their research is open access, etc., etc., etc. So, and we give away any IP that isn't used, but we don't provide any protection for that IP.
We have to hurry on. So, but you seem like you really want to say something, so I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
And we do have to hurry up, so this might be the last question.
I just want to say something about Knowledge Unlatched, which might actually help answer your research question. It's a new collective consortium of libraries around the world who are paying publishers a fixed fee to unlatch monographs in the social sciences and humanities, i.e. putting them on a Creative Commons non-commercial license and seeing what happens. And we're going to get a lot of data about what happens with the research. Will the impact factors go up? Will the people use it more? Will funders of research in humanities and social sciences feel more comfortable about knowing who's using the content rather than having it closed and only sitting in wealthy university libraries? So I just wanted to say, Charlotte, we ought to talk.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I make just one comment?
Sure.
I was just thinking about the challenges within universities around IP policies. I was very quite closely engaged in discussing the Edinburgh University IP policy when I was there. And what we actually managed to do at one point was to separate industrial property from copyright. So before that, the university was dealing with all IP together and lumping it into one bowl and saying, sort of, we need to deal with our IP policy. And I said, look, let's separate this off, because universities are very interested in patents. And then you can start pushing and saying, what value does copyright have to the university? And that's quite a challenging question for a university to answer. So
Thank
that
you.
was more looking at it from a different way.
And actually, we do have a bit more time, so yeah, I really welcome your question. Okay.
Hi, I'm from a company called Eulogy, and we're set up to connect students and academics with SMEs, predominantly in charities. And what we're coming across at the moment is how we articulate a framework for IP with this knowledge transfer. So at the moment, this is quite loose, and we're looking to the universities to kind of inform how that would work with us. And I was just wondering if there's something with your research that you could say categorically today, we could do this. These are the best way forward before you necessarily have all the results back.
I do think the toolkit that John flagged up at the beginning is a good starting point. Okay, so there has been the kind of Lambert toolkit has been provided, which is a good starting point. But what we've discovered is that it is actually not. Well, there are lots of things that are exceptions that throw up distinct problems, and what you actually need is a framework for debate. And I think that's what we haven't really created. So to recognise, and Georgina's point about involving everybody who has a stake in the answer in the model, because if you try to come up with one model, it won't work for everybody, and there is a need to be responsive as well. So I would say begin with some core principles, and then recognise that there is a degree of complexity which is not an accident but is actually necessary, and you require a consensual solution. That's, I think, the only advice I would give.
So that's really helpful. Shad, did you want to say? So, I just want to say something else, which is, okay, it's a bit more controversial. Let's not think about IP. Let's think about deal terms. Because if you think about rights negotiations between the BBC and the independent television sector for iPlayer, in fact, yes, of course, the rights are owned by the indie productions in the first place, so they have a clear framework for who owns the rights. But actually, getting that product to market was about doing the deal. And when you work with creative SMEs, it's always about doing the deal rather than... And so it is actually the answer an attitude rather than a framework of intellectual property templates that could work? Is it an attitude of wanting to do the deal rather than having the framework?
It's beyond an attitude towards an institutional culture, I think, because an individual attitude won't take you very far if you bump up against an institutional structure and culture that goes somewhere else. So I wouldn't underestimate the challenge involved in that.
So what is it about the knowledge exchange hubs which is kind of challenging that institutional? I mean, what are you learning from the hubs?
Persistence is one thing we're learning. Tolerating complexity and trying to reassure colleagues who are used to more simple models that complexity doesn't have to be scary. That really is a culture change. And I think also what Georgina said about having to bring in more people, because instead of working on projects with one partner and a large amount of funding, you may be, and all of the hubs are, collaborating with an extraordinary range of different kinds of institutions, and the skills to manage that are really different. So there is some cost associated with this. It's not just saying, hey, let's do it differently. It's actually arguing evidence, culture
Sure.
change,
Sure.
and a bit of investment.
Sure.
Is that
Absolutely, and I think the university is willing to do this. I don't think they've had the interest from this kind of volume of companies before, so they've had to change their way of dealing with it. And I mean, just building a simple template to assign IP away from the university. By the time I've been through the legal department and every other department, I'm completely frayed, but I have got an A4 sheet that I can now use for my companies. And that for every model that we're operating and using, they are willing to be flexible, but nobody has asked them to be this flexible. So I think the one thing the knowledge exchange hubs have done is they brought a critical mass of change into an outdated structure. So they're having to look radically at how they do things.
And Georgina, your sheet of A4 paper, is that up on the web somewhere for other people to... You're going to commit to publish it?
Yes, I think it's all up there.
Good.
I have no problem with that.
Fantastic. Okay, well, look, we've run out of time, I'm afraid. But there's an opportunity, if there are further questions, for you to ask people and come and... They're all very approachable. So before we go, I'd just like to join me in thanking the panellists, Georgina, Morag and Shiach.